So it's really important that you figure out in advance who a trusted cybersecurity lawyer is. You don't want to be calling like your tax lawyer because they don't necessarily know what to do. It's a complex process, it moves very quickly, and you got to get it right. Okay, all of you, the data you have is incredibly attractive because you have a lot of stuff. And you have a lot of really valuable stuff. You know, we talked about medical records. That's really valuable. You also have a lot of internal planning documents that might be important. You have financial information, you have employee applications. All of that makes government very attractive targets. You're also more attractive because government entities tend to not be as up to speed, although Utah's now gotten up to speed really quickly after the healthcare breach. But oftentimes you don't have the same resources that a Visa or, you know, massive company has, and they get hit too. So you have a lot of really important information. After the Utah data breach, we saw, and this is a little bit of old data, but we saw a 600% increase over a 4-month period in 2012. I think Dean and Jeff both said, look, once you get hit once, you go back to the well, right? So we'll see huge spikes after there's been a successful attack. So, and every successful attack then leads to sort of people becoming emboldened and trying to hit similar targets. State and local agencies in Utah had a material data breach just less than every 12 weeks. That's a huge, actually that wasn't, I'm sorry, that wasn't in Utah, that was nationally. That's a huge number, just less than every 12 weeks. Dean talked about the cost per record breached in the public sector, and he was looking at that Honeyman study as sort of our Bible as well. So the cost per record breach, I think he said was $110 per record breached in the public sector in the US. He looked at the US one. Globally, it's $71. So the good news is that public sector is at the very low end in terms of cost per record breach. The bad news is it's still really expensive. I mean, we're talking, if you get 1,000 records, you're into this, into a lot of money. You're talking about attorney's fees and forensic costs and notification costs, and potentially credit monitoring, you know, if there is data that, or if that's a service you decide to offer. Government has a lot of challenges that are unique. The first one, of course, is a lack of resources that are not equivalent to the lack of resources generally in the public sector, private sector. Sometimes there is an inadequate technology infrastructure, and even if there's not necessarily an inadequate technology infrastructure, it's not always consistent across the state. I bet each of you have your own infrastructure challenges. Competition for security personnel. Sarah said she was from the U.S. Chamber, or Utah Chamber. I was sitting in a Utah Chamber Leadership Council meeting, and one of the people from the private sector said, I cannot hire qualified IT people and keep them. And it's not just about money, right? It's just that there are so many opportunities that we hire these people and we find decent talent, and within a few months they're gone because they have some sort of bigger opportunity. So there is and of course government has the additional challenge that they can't pay private sector rates. So there's obviously a great deal of competition for properly trained security personnel. Employee overload, longer time to detection and response, and again what I said earlier, which is that you store very valuable personal information. So the takeaway from this today is every government entity needs an information security policy and a data breach response plan, and here's why. So we have this rule in our house that when we go out to dinner, the kids can't play with cell phones at the table, right? I'm the most unpopular mother on the planet, right? Because I won't let my kids play with cell phones. So we bring these games along. One of the games they play is called Would You Rather. Does anyone know what this game is? So we actually have this card game, and it presents you with two really bad choices. So this says, would you rather swim across a river that is filled with crocodiles, or spend the night on an island where man-eating tigers live? Would you rather have to sleep in a bed full of a cup of, I can't say anymore, a cup of cracker crumbs and a cup full of sand, or have to walk around all day, every day with grape jelly in your shoes? So it sort of struck me, none of those are particularly attractive options. And so if we play the game of would you rather in this room, cyber version, which is really fun, let me ask you, would you rather have suffer a data breach where thousands of your employees had their personally identifiable information stolen, or would you rather face the press after a data breach and say that you weren't really prepared for this? Okay? Neither one of those are good options. Okay? Doesn't matter which one you choose, it's still going to be bad. So the purpose of an information security policy and a data breach response plan is to keep you out of a situation where you're not left with just bad options, bad questions, bad choices. Okay, we've now moved from the realm of cybersecurity and planning and all this is a good idea. We're now into the realm that it is your legal obligation to protect data. 47 states have data protection laws, including Utah, which is pretty standard. And Utah's Protection of Personal Information Act says, any person who conducts business in the state, they do not exempt state entities. Any person who does business in the state, who conducts business in the state, and maintains personal information shall implement and maintain reasonable procedures to, and this is just part of the statute, prevent unlawful use or disclosure of personal information collected or maintained in the regular course of business. Okay, you got to protect your stuff. And destroy or arrange for the destruction of records containing personal information that are not to be retained by the person. So you have to figure out how to secure it and how to destroy it. And that is, again, a legal obligation that every one of us in this room has. And so this is from an article that, a quote that said, the best practice for municipal government is to adopt and implement a written information security plan or policy. So what is that? We at my firm, we sort of take this cradle to grave approach. We like to work with clients from the very beginning to create an information security plan, which includes a data breach response plan. But we also deal with the data breach itself and then sort of what happens after the data breach. So the very first sort of preventive step is to create an information security policy. Now I know that you guys are probably seeing dollar signs in your head and thinking, oh, that's just not something we can afford. And that may be the case, but you also don't necessarily need to start with the Cadillac, okay? We think it's really important to have an information security plan that you can implement in a reasonable, cost-effective way, and that you can follow. So I often say the only thing worse than not having a written information security policy is to have one you don't follow, because then you're setting yourself up for lawsuits. So in an information security policy, we do 5 things. We identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So the first thing we do is when we go into an organization is that we identify your assets and your risks. And I've gone through this process not only for clients but for my own entity. And that involves literally going around and figuring out what information people have, okay? All right, you've got an iPad, you may have a flash drive, we may have that filing cabinet back there. These are what our servers are. We have different kinds of servers for different parts of the firm. Figure out what it is you've got, right? Do you have health records? And most people would say, not really. Well, if you, for example, are a self-funded plan, you're going to have a lot of medical records of your employees. So you may have information, that's what I discovered. We have information that we don't even know about. So identify your assets and what your risks are. Okay, one of the big departments in our firm is estate planning. Those are incredibly sensitive documents. So we had to figure out where is that information kept, both electronically and in hard copy. then we trigger a process where we figure out a policy to protect the assets and minimize the risk. So, for example, if you have an unlocked door in your HR department, one of the ways you might want to protect that is by creating a lock on the door. You may want to restrict access for electronic access to certain parts of the network. We do that as well. For example, when you are serving high-profile clients, not everybody in the firm needs to have access to that information. So you want to make sure that only the people who are working on that matter, I don't care if they're employees, right? Someone in HR doesn't need to know what the financial planning is for client A. So you try and figure out who needs access to what and for what reason. And if they don't need access, then they don't get it. And it's very important to lock that in. This is a really important component because oftentimes when there's a data breach, you kind of get this, I thought Dean was doing it. Well, I thought Jeff was doing it. The problem is people oftentimes don't understand what their information security roles are. So when we create an information security plan, we very clearly identify what each person's role is. Okay, it's your job to update the firewall. It's your job to install the patches. And it's your job to take calls about software pop-ups that have come up. So very clearly identifying the person or persons who are responsible for enforcement. And then, this is sort of a subpart, it's a freestanding document, which we call the Data Breach Response Plan. And we try and encourage people to figure out in advance who their lawyer is, who their forensic expert is, who their PR person is, who their insurer is. It's also a good idea to have a lawyer look over your insurance because sometimes you think you have more coverage than you do. Because once that breach happens, you have an obligation that is triggered and you're going to have to work fast and efficiently so that you can minimize any damage. So when we go through and create a data breach response plan, we sometimes I'm the leader of the data breach response team, but we can help, it shouldn't be an IT person, by the way, is the leader of your data breach response team. They have a really important role, but they've got their hands full doing the IT role. They can't manage the PR, the recovery, the notification process. So when I am the incident lead, for example, one of the things we're going to have to think about is, do we want to get law enforcement involved? Now in Utah, we're very fortunate because when I go to national conferences, they think the FBI is scary and necessarily get them involved because they think they're going to lose control of the messaging. Okay? In Utah, we have a really talented group in the FBI, both on the federal side and on the state side, that works with people in a very close manner that I don't think is, I can't speak for Jeff, but I don't think that's typical across the country. And they really work with you so that they can help you, but they're not going to be out holding their own news conferences and saying, Emory County had this big data breach, and isn't this a disaster, and they should be prepared. They really do work as a partnership, but you have to be thinking about what role law enforcement might play. And I will say about Jeff's office, they've been incredibly helpful. I mean, helping someone unencrypt their files is a really amazing service that I don't think a lot of FBI agents across the country offer. So having those relationships, and we've been able to develop those relationships through our firm, having those relationships are really key to a successful program. And then, of course, creating a recovery plan, trying to figure out who it is who can help you recover your data. And then we sort of start this whole process all over again. What did we learn from this particular data breach? What are our vulnerabilities? How can we change our policy? Trying to update it and make it a living document because things change and people change. You can't have a person responsible for enforcement that left 4 years ago. And so we really emphasize, so when I said at the beginning, my husband and I had to have buy-in to this puppy, that's really important for everyone in this room. Because my kids were like the IT people, they were making the noises, and they were saying, this is what we want, this is what we need, and this is why we need it. But until my husband and I were on board and prepared, it wasn't going to happen. And that's why it's really important to approach it as a top-down issue, reinforcing that this is a priority for us. Privacy and cybersecurity is a priority. I do some antitrust training as well, and when we do that, and when we do training even for cybersecurity, one of the things that we ask is the CFO or the CEO or the COO actually be present to send the message, this is something you need to listen to. It's not just Mr. IT who has to pay attention. Employee negligence we talked about. I want to make sure that we are leaving time. Employee negligence is a major source of problems. These are sort of real life things. Thumb drives easily lost or stolen. I can't tell you how many times they say, well, I had a thumb drive, but it was on my desk. Did it get thrown in the trash? Did someone take it? What happened to the thumb drive? So I think actually thumb drives are really bad for any sort of sensitive information. There are better ways to communicate information. Dean's shaking his head. Because the other thing is you don't know where the thumb drive came from, right? So it may have viruses already installed on it. Yeah.
So one of the attacks we do is we will leave a USB drive in your parking lot, labeled wedding photos, or labeled, something that would be enticing, executive salary, something that, somebody might grab it, and first thing they're going to do, they're going to get on their computer, going to stick it in, because they want to give it back to the person who lost their wedding photos, right? I mean, this is important stuff. And so we can just leave a few in the parking lot, and almost every time, within a few hours, someone has installed it, it calls home to our data center, and we know, okay, we got a computer we can use now. Cool, thank you. It's a very real risk. So they either should be encrypted or don't allow them at all.
Yeah, and encrypted has actually saved clients before. We've had things that are lost from thumb drives, and the fact that it was encrypted, like if you have HIPAA data, that's actually a safe harbor. And then this photos of work documents on phones. I'll just tell you very quickly. UCLA Medical Center had this case a couple of years ago where they had an affiliated clinic. It wasn't part of the hospital, but at the affiliated clinic worked the new girlfriend of a guy, and she knew about old girlfriend. And old girlfriend happened to be a patient at the clinic. She actually wasn't a patient at the clinic, but they had access to her records. So someone printed out her medical records, left them on the counter. New girlfriend takes her cell phone, sees that old girlfriend has an STD, not information you want out, takes a picture of it, sends it to the boyfriend and a bunch of other people, okay? Who do you think got sued, right? It wasn't new girlfriend. It was UCLA Medical Center for $1.25 million. So photos that are taken, work document photos, as a policy, you shouldn't be taking photos of anything you wouldn't want broadcast across the world. So in that case, actually, it went to a jury, and the jury found UCLA not liable. But the reason they found them not liable is because they had policies and procedures that were written in place, and they had the physician who was in charge of this clinic sign off every year. I've read these policies, I understand, I know I'm not supposed to share my password, which he did, but you're going to have people do stupid things, and you're going to have bad apples, but you have to protect yourself as an entity. And that was a big factor when they interviewed the jury. Well, they had policies and procedures, they were doing the best they could, and they tried to implement them. So that was what saved UCLA in that particular case. So you didn't think cybersecurity could be so, racy, except for the romance scam that Jeff wants to talk more about. So, Dean provided you with a checklist. I'm going to provide you with another government checklist, which is to start by establishing a written information security plan, creating a data breach response team, conduct training, perform vulnerability testing. And Dean was talking about that. That's really important because your IT people are used to seeing this stuff every day, and sometimes you're blind, you have your own blind spots. Third-party vendor agreements are huge, and we don't recognize that. I bet all of you enter into contracts all the time where you sign off on it, and I guarantee they say things like, in the event of a data breach, we're not responsible. All the responsibility will be on you. And people sign off on those all the time. Even if they're forms and even if they're big companies with whom you're negotiating for like software that you want to implement, nothing is non-negotiable, okay? Or at least you need to go in with your eyes open. PCI DSS standards if you're taking credit card information, and start today to create a realistic timeline. Again, this is not something that you have to, jump into all at once. So you don't have to sort of go back and take all these notes. The point is you know a contact person, either within your organization or outside your organization, who could be like my dog trainer, right? Someone you can call, someone who can help you create a plan, someone you can ask questions of. That's the best way to manage this huge role of cybersecurity, who can figure out whether this is something you need to worry about or whether this is something that we don't need to address right now. I'm happy to answer any questions. My contact information is obviously at the end, and I think now we're going to take questions to the whole group.
If we haven't thoroughly confused you yet, now's the time. No.
I'm also willing to take puppy training tips, if anybody.
Don't do it.
Yeah, I knew that. Someone was going to say that. That ship's kind of already sailed, actually.
So you recommend not putting on your email that you're out of the office?
Yeah, that's actually a great one. She said, don't you recommend not putting your out-of-office reply on your email? Let me tell you, that's not theoretical. I had a client who had her out-of-office on. Somehow, some bad guy got a hold of it and sent an email that looked like it was coming from her. She was in an HR department. This was right before tax day. And sent what this person thought was an email from their HR executive assistant and said, hey, I need you to upload all your W-2s for the company. Well, so this woman put it on a disk, took it to the office. Of course, the woman's not there because they knew she wasn't going to be there because her out-of-office reply was on. She wrote back, hey, I just saw you weren't in the office. What do you want me to do with this? Yeah, I'm out of the office. Go ahead and upload it to this Dropbox. Well, they had just been implementing a new Dropbox system. So, thief either got lucky or had inside information. And they did. They uploaded like thousands of W-2 records because they thought it was tax time. This happens to our clients every year because it looks legitimate. It looks like it's coming from HR or from the CFO or from someone. So I actually don't put out-of-office replies on pretty much ever. Sometimes I'll do it within my organization. And again, social media posts, don't put, if you're going to go on vacation and post pictures, do it after you come back, right? I mean, but people can't help themselves because their lives are interesting. And so,
Yeah. I think that one of the clients we talked to, their approach was like Elaina said, was if it's outside the office, either put it like one day at a time, like don't have a date range, I'll be gone from July 15th to July 30th. Just say, sorry, I'm out of the office, I'm responding to email, and we'll get back to you as soon as I can, right? And then it just shows that every day, instead of giving them a range of when you're gone. And again, you might do that just internally, and then externally, you might just not have a reply. But at least you can let the people that you trust, your internal folks, have a little more information. But sometimes the best reply is no reply.
plus everybody checks their emails while they're gone anyway, right?
That's right.
So,
You never get away from on vacation.
yeah, so what if you're on vacation? I don't care. Yes, sir.
My IT staff have been looking at ransomware at a program that will take and it'll identify ransomware early on in the process and will copy the files ahead of the ransomware. Are you aware of that, and does it work, and how effective is it? Or are there other options?
So just receiving the question, they've identified some software that is pre-ransomware prevention, basically. Yeah. I have heard of a few of these products, haven't used any of them personally, but frankly, anything that's backing up your data and doing so to a remote location will protect you from that particular event, assuming that's the core reason for the attack. Like we were saying, in many of the attacks we saw, they were ransoming your files, but then they were also stealing the passwords off of your local computer. So unless that software protects both the passwords and the files, you still have risk, right? But I advise you, any software that you're looking at that can help you manage that risk in a cost-effective way is a good way to go.
So when you say stealing passwords, you talk about passwords that might be saved on a browser on your computer, or that they ask you have to give us your password, or in what ways are they stealing it, I guess?
Sure, so what we were seeing, there are several programs that are available that you can download for free off of sort of the dark web and places where hackers exchange tool sets. And what it does is it will run at whatever permission you are locally, and it scrapes from memory all of the accounts that have been used to log on to that computer as long as they've been stored. Many computers, particularly Windows computers, will store password hashes on the local computer. And this ransomware we saw was designed to scrape all of those hashes for legitimate access, and then they were using them on other computers around the network. So they were stealing them both from the memory as well as from browsers. Does that answer your question?
So how do you prevent that mess?
Oh, there are several ways. There's some really good endpoint products that use what are called next-gen AI, so artificial intelligence, machine learning. There are 2 or 3 products that we've tested in our lab actually work really well, but then also controlling local admin access. So if your users are logging on as a power user or just as a non-administrative user, that helps quite a bit. And then you can have rules on preventing many of the Windows tasks. And this is kind of complicated, but like PowerShell and WMI commands can be restricted, so they're only run from administrative servers. There are several ways that you can prevent that attack, and we can perhaps go off the side and discuss it, how we help our clients. But really, I just say a lot of it just comes down to basic patching, because most of the ransomware that we're seeing was a result of a group of hackers called shadow brokers. They broke into where the NSA had a bunch of their cyber tools, and they were using these tools, weaponizing them and attacking businesses. Well, Microsoft patched this stuff, at the beginning of the year. So as long as you've been patching your Windows computers, none of this would have any effect. But if you're not patching, then there's a lot of risk there. Yes, sir.
This may be for you. How hard is it to balance a person being able to do the job with the computer with the security needs that IT and everything is probably locked things up so hard to get harder to do?
No, that's a really good question. That's
Can you repeat it? You couldn't hear back here.
Yeah, so the question is, how do we balance the impact of security with our productivity? Right? This is something we talk to clients all the time. And so the way I advise them is it's like every other business risk you need to manage. You need to have, in my opinion, a steering committee, or you need to have your legal counsel involved, you need to have your technology folks, and then you have to have people representing your different stakeholders. Developers are a group of people I know that have the hardest time with security and doing their job. And many of the IT staff have the same thing. So getting a steering committee together that can kind of bring to the table the demands or the work environment that they need to be productive. And then you lay out all the facts, you prioritize them, and then you find technology that can help you manage that risk. And sometimes it's just a better process. Sometimes it's finding technology that is an enabler. Like when we work with clients, and I said we work with a lot of law firms, because they bill every hour, time is super precious. So we try to find security tools that really work and actually save time, like 2-factor authentication, where we tie together single sign-on. So the attorney, instead of logging in 12 times throughout the day to do their work, they log on one time in the morning, and that lasts through lunch, and then they log in one more time after lunch for the rest of the day, and it gives them access to all of their tools. So there are ways to use good security technology that actually give you time back. And so I would just be really creative, have a steering committee that talks about what are the business drivers, and then be reasonable with those controls. Because I've met plenty of IT guys that go very, very gangbusters on locking everything down, and then like you say, nobody can do their jobs anymore. And it's really got to be a balancing act between business demand and security with risk, interweaved into that. Does that answer your question? Great question. Any others? Again, thank you guys so much.
I just wanted to make a